Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. And Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Very well, thank you. And this is a very important day. Every day is important for foreign policy, what we see and what we don't see and what they're hiding and all the deceit that goes on. But this is a pretty important day because there's a major speech being given tonight. And I want to know if you're going to be paying attention and doing your homework to find out whether or not we have a consistent policy in foreign affairs. That's what we have to wait and see. So I haven't decided how I'm going to spend my time. But anyway, I want to talk about Venezuela today and the problems there that exist and may well be heating up. And there's, three members of our government appointed by Trump, Bolton and Abrams, as well as Pompeo, pretty important people, and they have a design on how we're going to capture and dominate, steal the oil, and be kingpins of everything going on in Venezuela. And of course, I think the theme of what we're going to be talking about, it may not be a cakewalk.
That term.
But we are looking at Bolton, especially on his arrogance and all his plans. I mean, you talk about three radical neocons. What are they doing in this administration? Yeah. Are they a part of it, or are they undermining, or are they the leaders? We haven't figured that out yet. All we can look at is the policy and what may happen. But I want to start off by reading a quote, from Bolton, and it has to do, with Venezuela, and it's pretty strong because they want. Their goal right now, our goal, and they now, yeah. They in our government want to, get Maduro thrown out, and this is what Bolton had to tell the military in Venezuela. Very, very straightforward. He says, "To the Venezuelan military high command, now is the time to stand on the side of the Venezuelan people. It is your right and responsibility to defend the Constitution and democracy for the Venezuelans." Well, like we've said before, Daniel, we like people who defend the Constitution, but can we defend their Constitution by defying and trashing our Constitution? And can we be sure that they're really, the military will really be on the side of the Constitution by pulling off a military coup? So there might be a little bit of deceitfulness in what we're hearing from Bolton.
Yeah, and there was a British member of Parliament who was pretty good. He tweeted earlier today, "What a low we've sunk to, where restoring democracy in Venezuela means a foreign-backed coup which appeals to the military for overthrow." So, when you hear Bolton say something like that, a couple of things. First of all, he's directly telling the military to attack the people. I mean, he's telling them to attack the people who don't support the regime change. He's calling for a civil war. It's pretty unprecedented. And the other thing, on what basis, we talked about this before, on what basis does he speak for the people? You won't see it much on the U.S. mainstream media, but there are huge crowds in favor of Maduro, and there are crowds in favor of Guaido. What makes one crowd illegitimate and the other legitimate? How does he base this? At the very best, from what he's saying, in places like Caracas, it's divided 50-50. At very best, from their perspective. So you're going to divide the country in half, and you're going to encourage a civil war. It's really unprecedented. Yeah,
I've had discussions with some friends from the progressive side of the aisle, and the sincere people who are anti-war, but they want a compromise on it, and they want to send money and aid and humanitarian assistance as if this is the solution to the problem. But I was always opposed to that for constitutional reasons, and one of the practical reasons is you send in food into an area where there's a civil war going on, and the food aid or any aid you send always ends up into the hands of one group. Either we did it or one group is stronger than the other. So it really hasn't done anything. It just antagonizes and makes more trouble. But I think this whole thing is a little bit different. Now we're talking about immediately, I think, Trump or others, we'll send you money and we're going to send you food and we're going to send you aid. So that is recognized. But Bolton's a little bit stronger than this. This dividing up the aid that we send in the past has usually been on the QT. You know,
Yeah.
whoever's the strongest grabs the food and runs off and uses weapons. But he's pretty blunt. Well, if we have to, we'll try to starve these people and give it to our friends.
Yeah, it really is the weaponization of humanitarianism, which is really particularly repulsive. But there already is, I've seen on Twitter, there are some aid convoys on the border of Colombia and Venezuela. And what the U.S. wants to do is put this aid in the hands of the Guaido backers, the people who support the coup, and not allow it to go to the civilians, the people who may support the government. And while they're doing that simultaneously, they're putting ever-increasing sanctions, really crippling sanctions on the government. You know, essentially, it'll prevent anyone in the world from having any sort of transaction with the Venezuelan oil company, and that really is the lifeblood of what economy they have. That's what feeds the people, and certainly not adequately, but government supporters are fed by it. So on the one hand, you're going to people that are starving, that are hungry, are going to get food if they support the U.S. coup. They're going to starve if they don't. That's pretty sick.
It is pretty bad. And I reviewed a little bit about how long we've been in this business, 10, 12 years, or even longer we've been involved in Venezuela. But there was a quote from Chavez that was on the internet about, us putting on sanctions because there was an election coming up. And we wanted to make sure our guy won, and we were anti-Chavez. But he loved it, and he said it at the time. He says, "This is exactly what I want," and he was gleeful about it. And lo and behold, it was enough to bring the people together to be opposed to foreign invaders and people meddling in their elections. And Chavez got elected. So the sanctions, I guess they work at times, but they're so immoral and so wrong. I don't even think there's any practical benefit ever from the sanctions, and that is our weapon. And the news has been recently that we're going to be using force to overthrow Maduro. But we're using force all the time, and I've argued all along that sanctions are an act of war. Yeah. If you blockade people and they can't have food or supply and sell their oil and things, that's an act of war. So sanctions, the violence is already there, and then you point out about the humanitarian approach of how they were going to pass out the welfare benefits. We're at war. We've committed war, and it's continuously, but we're on the side of good. We're on the side of good, and this is the reason that a lot of Americans will go along with it. And you can't answer this by saying, no, Maduro isn't a great guy. So that isn't the point. It's who should solve the problems inside Venezuela. And besides, think of the ramifications of all this. If we do get more aggressive and Trump might be pushed in a corner where he has to, well, there's a couple other countries that have investments in Venezuela. I understand the Russians have been involved and the Chinese have been involved. Do you think they're going to just sit back? One of the reasons back in this period of time that we wanted to put on sanctions is this is so ironic, that the Venezuelans violated our sanctions against Iran, and therefore we had to punish them, just like how we're punishing and fighting with the Chinese because they violated, the sanctions against Iran. It never ends.
And you think the rest of the world doesn't realize this, to understand this. Our good friend Jacob Hornberger had a really good piece over at the Future of Freedom Foundation, and we put it up on the Ron Paul Institute website too. But he points out the irony of President Trump essentially nationalizing to the U.S. the Venezuelan oil company Citgo. The gas stations here in the U.S. This is the American arm of the Venezuelan oil company. Trump essentially just seized it. And at the same time, talking about Maduro as a dictator. Well, this is a dictatorial thing for President Trump to do, as Hornberger points out. There's no state of war between the U.S. and Venezuela. There's no congressional action giving him the authority to seize the property of another country. He is essentially acting like a dictator, which he accuses Maduro of being, by grabbing things that aren't his.
Over the years, it's been hard for me to accept some of the arguments of such evil in the world, like starvation of people or deliberately starting a war to save humanity. But, you know, this issue of starvation has been around for a while, and you think, is it just an inadvertent, unnecessary, or unintended consequence of their policies, or is it deliberate? And when you think back, you know, in the 20th century, we had the starvation of the Russian people, you know, under Stalin, and what about in our history of Iraq? You know, the Madeleine Albright comments about 500,000 children dying because of our sanctions and our bombing. Well, that's the price for us to, you know, deliver our message of liberty and peace and tranquility. A few people will suffer. So it's quite conceivable, even though you want to say nobody can be that monstrous. Bolton wouldn't deliberately want to starve anybody, but he's so blatant that you can tell exactly what he's doing. I guess give him credit for being honest in his evil. Yes.
And, you know, we saw a piece on anti-war that was talking about how it's unlikely that this is going to be resolved without bloodshed. The original plan of the neocons is to endorse this guy for president, who, by the way, was not elected to anything. We just picked him out of the blue. Endorse him for president, and then everything's going to overturn. He's going to be our guy. We're going to get the oil. That's not happening that way. The military hasn't turned on Maduro. And let's not forget, 170 countries still recognize Maduro. That's 88% of the world. You won't hear that on the U.S. media because, oh, everyone's coming our way. It's not the case. So this isn't happening. I think that's why the quote you had was so important. I think we're doing Plan B, which is to openly encourage a civil war in a country of millions of people where millions will be hurt, will die, thousands, hundreds of thousands, who knows. And what the neocons have done is they've put poor old gullible Trump in a corner. Not that he's innocent, because the buck stops there. He's in a corner now. What is the U.S. going to do? They can't back down now. They've made their decision. It's written in stone. What are they going to do? The only thing they can do is hope for a military solution.
And there doesn't seem to be any balance that'll balance out Bolton. You know, Trump has created this by appointing him, and he can't really contest him now. And then you think about Bolton coming out of that press conference and having 5,000 troops to Colombia.
Yeah.
You think, well, that was just an accident. That couldn't have been an accident. That was a direct threat. The troops are coming, but he probably in his own mind said, well, no, this is just strategy. This is just a reminder. We're not putting 5,000 troops in Colombia and this sort of thing. But it still, once again, it puts them in a corner. So when they, when it comes to that point, how can he back down? And Trump, when he gets pushed, probably doesn't want to back down.
Yeah.
So I just wished we could do more to promote a policy where this is so unnecessary. That's always in my mind. Why do they do this? It isn't necessary. It accomplishes nothing. It costs a lot of money. It hurts us more than it hurts them. It costs there's a cost and loss of liberty here, and yet we just go along, and very few people say anything. And I keep thinking of the length of time it took to wake up the American people of the ridiculousness of us trying to westernize Vietnam, which came more after we surrendered. That's when it became more westernized. So it's just amazing that the evidence, and I think you've mentioned it so many times, what policy, what country have we taken over has been successful?
Yeah.
What can the neocons claim? Well, yeah, we've had our problems. We didn't do so well in Vietnam, but look at this. Look, we've done a really great job in Afghanistan, and that's why we ought to come home. But most people know. We kept hoping and hoping, but I think most people have come to the conclusion, it's not going to happen. We're not going to march home. The pressure is too great, and the pressure is deep state. It's bipartisan, and it's monolithic. It's the media, and when you think of the recent votes in the Congress to put pressure on Trump. Not to take out a single soldier out of Syria. It's an overwhelming support for war and keep the warmonger going, keep the war pressure on and the troops around the world. You can't back down. It would look like we would be weak.
And the junior senator from Kentucky had a good speech about that yesterday.
Yeah.
But, of course, most of the EU like the lapdogs they are, just went along with this policy. So did Canada. But the Italians, good for them, they stood up, they vetoed the EU statement, so they couldn't issue a joint statement recognizing this guy as the president. Here's what the Italians said upon vetoing it. And this is great, you talk about successes. This same mistake was made in Libya, and today everyone recognizes it. We must prevent this from happening again in Venezuela. You know, that is a pretty good point.
Well, you know, Rand, the other day I thought made a good point when he had to challenge the leadership because they defeated the proper position by saying, well, we can't have a precipitous exit from Afghanistan. And he made a point. It should have been a little bit obvious. You shouldn't have had to make it. Well, I don't see why leaving after 17 years is precipitous.
Yeah. And then he said at the same time, you say we can't announce we're leaving because it'll give the enemy a clue as to where we're going. So
yeah, right.
But I would just, I guess if we're closing it, I would just tell our audience, there are thousands of you that are going to watch this video today. You have power. You have a lot of power, more than you know, more than you may think. You can call your representatives. You can tell them, we do not want war with Venezuela. We don't want to pick the Venezuelan president. We have enough trouble picking our own. We don't want this. We can reject this. They will listen. I worked for Dr. Paul on Capitol Hill for 10, 11, 12 years. I know what it's like to get a barrage of calls. It's important, if you believe in this, if you believe in peace, take a few minutes, talk to your representative in a polite way, but let them know how you feel about it.
Very good. That's good advice, and it goes back to the old adage about, well, you have one vote, why vote? It's not worth anything. But I think there's two ways to look at political action and making phone calls and talking. Is one, you can make a point. If political action allowed me to reach more people, but I was realistic and knew that I was not going to bring about the revolution that I would like to have. And people always ask me over the years, how did you manage to do this? Why weren't you just literally disgusted with it? How did you put up with it? And I said, well, I think I had set my goals properly, that we could have an impact and we can do legislation, occasionally have a legislative victory, but still it was an ability to reach more people. So if you can give your congressmen or senators a little bit of encouragement, because a lot of times they believe that way, but they need encouragement. They think, oh, this is not a good political position. So it does play a role. It's just another avenue. Ultimately, the understanding of the basic issues of non-intervention in our lives completely and totally is the issue, but there's all kinds of ways. And I've always said that everybody has a responsibility, but everybody has their own method of doing it. I used mine, others will use something else, and there's always something that you can do to spread an understanding of why the type of policy that we're following, whether it's the economic policy, whether it's the foreign policy, or this crazy stuff going on in political correctness. No, there's an audience out there, but to throw your hands up and say that we can't do anything, I don't think that helps a whole lot. There's something that can be done. Besides, you can get some satisfaction from it because you'll discover there are more people out there that agree with you than you might expect. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.